Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hi there, John McAdams here. Welcome to episode 330 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. Mike Arnold is up next in my ongoing Africa hunting mini-series to talk about Bushbuck and Nyala. These two species of spiral-horned antelope are both magnificent creatures that, as different as they may appear from each other at first glance, also share a few surprising similarities. In fact, they also live in many of the same areas and even compete with each other for food, to the detriment of one of them, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. Mike and I discuss these two species in detail in this episode: where they live, what they look like, how they behave, how they are commonly hunted, how these antelope species are similar and different from each other, and some of the ongoing observations scientists and professional hunters are making regarding how one of these species is often coming out on the losing end when these two species compete with each other in certain areas. This is a great episode. You're really going to like it. Mike is always awesome to have on the show. Before we get started talking to him, though, I have two important admin notes to share with you. First, like I have mentioned previously, we are doing another Big Game Hunting Podcast hunt in Africa, 19 to 28 July 2025. I went down the list of listeners who previously contacted me expressing interest in going on a podcast hunt. For that reason, this hunt filled up almost immediately. There's one catch, though. Unfortunately, one of the hunters booked for this hunt has a medical condition that is looking like it is probably going to prevent him from joining us next summer. It's not definite yet, but at this point, it's not looking like he will make it. I'd put the odds at probably about 25% that he will receive medical clearance to travel. For that reason, I want to book one guy as an alternate in case that other hunter cannot come. This hunter will know one way or another in January of 2025. This particular hunter is booked for buffalo and plains game. So ideally, I would like to book another alternate hunter who is also interested in those same species, buffalo and plains game. Shoot me an email if you are interested and we can talk details. But the gist of things is that everyone attending the podcast hunt is hunting at a discount compared to our regular pricing. If you book as an alternate, I will, of course, extend that same pricing to you. If the other hunter cannot come, you can have his spot. I look forward to hunting with you, and I'm sure we'll have a great time together. If that other hunter can come, then I will either refund your deposit to you early in 2025, or I will rebook you for another opening we have in our schedule, and you can hunt then at the discounted price I'm offering for the podcast hunt. You can't lose with this offer. Shoot me an email, john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com, with the subject line podcast hunt, and we can discuss this in more detail. And for my second admin note, speaking of discounted hunts in Africa, we have two openings remaining in our schedule for late October and early November 2024. I have slashed prices for both of those dates. You can hunt plains game, you can hunt buffalo, you can hunt both then if you so choose. So if you did not draw a tag anywhere this year, or if you are just otherwise have an opening in October or November and you want to hunt in Africa, this is a great opportunity to enjoy an African safari during a time of year where the hunting is fantastic, especially for kudu, impala, buffalo, and wildebeest, and also do so at a discount. And pertinent to today's episode, the Nyala hunting there is fantastic as well, and we take some really nice ones each year. Bushbuck hunting is good too, but we just don't take nearly as many bushbuck as we do in Nyala, and you'll learn a little bit more about why that is the case in many places in today's episode. Once again, email me, john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com, and I would be happy to discuss pricing and dates in more detail with you. Okay, admin notes are complete. Let's get started talking to Mike about Nyala and Bushbuck. Well, good morning, Mike. It is a pleasure having you back on the show. Thanks a lot for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, John. This is always a treat getting together with you.
Well, so you were last on the show in episode 253. We talked about your hunt in Cameroon, and you were also on in episode 213, and we talked about your book, Bringing Back the Lions, and Kutada 11, Mark Haldane, what he's done there over the last couple of decades. So I encourage people that haven't already listened to those episodes to go listen to them. But today we're talking about spiral horn antelope, specifically kudu not kudu, Bushbuck and Nyala. That's always the first spiral horn that comes to mind for me is kudu. But that's not what we're talking about today.
They're beautiful too.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about both species. Give people a brief overview of where they live, what they look like, what they eat, what their behavior is like. Then we can talk about your specific hunts for each species. Then we could talk about what was going on with them in Kutada 11. So tell us a little bit about Nyala first off. I'm assuming since you hunted them in Mozambique, you were hunting common Nyala, not mountain Nyala, right?
That is correct. Yeah. I'd love to hunt the mountain version, but no, we were definitely hunting the Nyala that most folks go across to Africa to hunt. The Nyala, interestingly, and I love it, really was a fairly restricted species for a good long while. And they were restricted to really bad malarial areas like I hunted in. Now, this was back in the day when hunters wanted to go get them in the 1800s or whatever. They had to try to penetrate these areas where these Nyala were hanging out in this bush that was dense, but also lots of water and lots of mosquitoes. And at the time, for most of them, they didn't understand that the mosquitoes are what was giving them the malaria. And so that was why very few folks hunted them. Very few folks had them in their trophy rooms. Today, it's a very different story because of their natural expansion out of those areas, because of conservation through hunting, and also transportation into other areas that they're suited for, like in South Africa. There's a lot of availability. My brother, for example, shot his Nyala, his first one anyway, in South Africa when he went on a safari there. Now he's hunted in Kutada 11 as well, and he's going back to try to get a one bigger than mine. He's my older brother. We're always competing. What can I say? So I did hunt my Nyala in Kutada 11 in the Zambezi Delta area, the deltaic area around the Zambezi River, as I did my bushbuck. But Nyala are a larger animal than the bushbuck, sort of. The situation that I use as an analogy is our elk and our mule deer. Now, Nyala are not body size as large as our elk, obviously, and they're not as much larger than the bushbuck than our elk is than the mule deer. But it's a very analogous situation where you have two species competing for same food sources, same areas to bed in, to have young in, and that sort of thing. But the Nyala itself and the bushbuck are very similar species. And sometime in the past, we now know from I'm a geneticist, so I'm a nerd. I'm not only a hunter, but I'm a real live nerd. I have a card and everything that says nerd on it. And so what we know as geneticists now from DNA work on bushbuck and Nyala that we have around is that they actually mated in the past and formed hybrids. And so they're that close. They're actually fairly similar and fairly closely related organisms, which means they're going to compete even more than our elk and our mule deer are. So, because they're a little bit more different from one another than the bushbuck and Nyala.
Yeah, bushbuck and Nyala are interesting species. If I'm remembering right, for both species, the males look very different from the females. And
correct.
And when I remember the first time I saw like a female of each of them, are like, what the heck is that? And like, oh, well, that's a bushbuck or that's an Nyala. I was like, golly, that does not look like the same species. And the female bushbuck look somewhat similar to the female Nyala as well.
That is correct. In fact, these are very good examples of, and I'm a mammalogist as well. I worked on mammals, bats, rats, all sorts of deer, everything you can imagine. probably because I also like to hunt things that are mammal. But you have to keep in mind that these are examples of mammals that when they were collected, the males and females were considered different species. They didn't even know they were the same thing.
Mhm.
And that happens a lot, actually. It happens in birds too. You can probably, some of your listeners can go, that's right. I mean, these cardinals look really different from one another, or whatever it happens to be. Hummingbirds, male and female. But they do. You're exactly right. They look really different. We had a female bushbuck who was pregnant in Catata 11's camp. She would come out and graze, browse on one of these huge termite mounds right in the middle of camp. And I am a biologist, and I had to ask my PH, what the devil's that? When she was up there the first time I ever saw a female bushbuck. And he said, oh, that's a female bushbuck. I said, I'll be daggoned. I did not recognize it.
What does each one of these species eat? You mentioned that bushbuck are browsers.
Well, they both browse. Once again, very, very similar to our elk and mule deer situation, where bushbuck really are animals that hang out in denser areas.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, denser areas. If you think about elk and mule deer are browsers. Elk browse, but they're grazers, okay, as well. And both will graze, both will browse. Okay, so bushbuck are browsers, though, more like our white-tailed deer. And Nyala browse as well, but they'll take advantage of open areas. You see Nyalas out in the open much more often than you do bushbuck. Bushbuck you can think about like our white-tailed deer in a lot of ways, where they are, they're crepuscular, so they're going to hang out more right at dawn and dusk, but they're also going to be in those edges. So they're going to hang close to edges of denser in those areas, sand forests and Catata 11 and that sort of thing. But they're both going to feed off a very similar browse. And that's where the problem comes in for the bushbuck. And because Nyalas are highly competitive with them.
And so it seems like in the areas where I've been in Africa, where both of them live, like for instance, when I was in Namibia, I didn't see either one of them there. And I don't think either one of them is really native to that part of Namibia. But where I've been in southern Zimbabwe along the Limpopo River, and then on the other side of the river in South Africa, bushbuck along both sides, a little bit of Nyala. And it seems like the further south you go into South Africa, I've seen more Nyala. And it seems like those bushbuck in particular, really, like every place I've been where there's a river, the bushbuck are right along the river edges.
Yep, you're exactly right. They love riverine habitat. So having that wet area with the dense bush, you'll see them a lot there. Going back to what you just mentioned about Zimbabwe, my guess is, because I'm not familiar and I'm a scientist, I don't like to guess in one sense, but my guess is the reason you saw more bushbucks and Nyala in those areas is the Nyala haven't built up their populations yet. They're naturally expanding into those areas, and they will build up their populations most likely, and you'll see more and more of them in there.
Yeah, so when I was in that part of Zimbabwe, it was 2012, so it was about 12 years ago. Several years after that, I went back to South Africa, and I was literally right across the border in South Africa in Kruger Park, maybe less than 50 kilometers from where I was actually hunting. And I saw the biggest Nyala I'd ever seen in my life in Kruger Park there. I mean, it was a beautiful picture I got of him and everything. And so I would not at all be surprised to hear that there was good Nyala hunting in that part of Zimbabwe now anyway.
I suspect there is. And, once again, I mean, the food sources that they need are there. The habitats they need, the habitats they need to escape predators are there, et cetera, et cetera. And, the biggest predator that, from studies, the major predator of both Nyala and bushbuck seems to be the leopard. There are lions and cheetahs now back in Katahdin 11. They've been reintroduced, and they were both supposed to be there. They were naturally there in the past. Neither, in terms of their studies, seem to be majorly feeding off of bushbucks or Nyalas. But studies that have been done in South Africa, actually, they have found that leopards are what nail the bushbucks and Nyalas in particular.
I had 2 separate clients in 1 year in South Africa. One of them shot a bushbuck that was missing one of his hooves, say like below, like right where our ankle would be. And we're guessing a crocodile. We tried to get him and just got a piece of him. But he was, it was amazing. He was just walking around on 3 legs. He looked like he was fine. Otherwise, they didn't know he was hurt until they got him on the ground. And then another client, while they were hunting something else, they stumbled upon a female bushbuck that had been buried and cached, almost looked like a leopard had killed it and stashed it away.
Yeah, that's it doesn't surprise me. But once again, that all mine is coming from nerdy scientific papers, so I haven't actually observed it in the bush, the predation on them. But I do know from Katahdin 11 where they really monitor their big cats and they monitor what they're eating. And what they're not seeing is, major predation from lions and cheetahs yet on the bushbucks or Nyalas, although I can't imagine why they wouldn't eat them. I don't think they're like, oh, I don't like the taste of that. I think it's mostly that they running across them.
In an area where you have a healthy population of bushbuck and Nyala, it seemed like especially your bushbuck density would be much lower than would be the case, say, for impala or buffalo in Katahdin 11. So I kind of wonder if that's also just part of it too, that they'd happily eat a bushbuck, but there's just so many other more plentiful species of food for them to find.
It's interesting that you say that, and every predator pretty much does. Look, they like meat, okay, and so they'll eat everything from other lions to other cheetahs to, whatever it happens to be, they'll eat the meat and hunt that particular animal that they run across. But they are finding that things like, because of where they are, because there's a lot of microhabitats in any place we are. And so in Katahdin 11, you have the floodplains, you have the sand forests, you have, just the pans, all of these areas, what they look like. You've been out in the woods there more than I have. So they have all of those different ecotypes, if you will, ecosystems. And so the lions end up, because of where they are, the lions have primarily been focusing on the 14,000 warthogs that are there, probably more than that. Yeah. And the cheetahs are going after the reed buck. Once again, is it because they're easier for them to catch? Or I think it's more that it's opportunistic. So I think it's like you're saying, it's opportunistic because that's where they are. The Nyalas are all over the place. So but they're not really, and the bushbucks, they're not really where the cheetahs are an open habitat animal. And the lions are going to be hanging out in hunting in open habitats mostly, if you think about it, not in dense forests. So I think that's why they're not predating on them, and why leopards would, because leopards do hang out in those dense areas.
Now, it would also seem like a bushbuck is a much more solitary animal as well. I've never seen a bushbuck with another bushbuck. I've seen a female with a baby one time, and every other time it's just been a lone female or a lone male. I'm assuming that's pretty typical in how they operate.
It is, and you will see, obviously, when males and females are in the mating season, you will see them paired up occasionally, and I have, occasionally seen them. I have seen a different version of them in Cameroon, bushbuck, Nigerian bohor, and in the bushbucks that are over there and the reed bucks that are over there and all that, you'll see them pairing up occasionally. But once again, that has to do, like you're saying, it has to do with it if they're with young, and it also has to do with whether or not they are in mating season, okay, in the rut, if you want to call it that. Nyala, on the other hand, as you know, do end up in large groups. I mean, in Catata 11, they sent me a photo of, I've forgotten what Mark said. It was like 35 or 40 of the males. It was unbelievable. And there were some monsters in that group.
Jeez.
And so, but you see with the Nyalas, the stereotypical for the Nyala females is that they'll have last year's young with them and this year's young with them and another even older at times. So a lot of times, and we have photos of these that we've used in articles and in my first book, where you'll see the female and then 3 young of varying ages. And we saw those a lot, those kinds of groups. So you do get larger groups of Nyala than you do Bushbuck.
Mm-hmm. I've never seen this, but I've heard that Bushbuck can be darn aggressive animals, especially when they're cornered or injured or something. Have you heard that as well?
I have. I've read it. I've never experienced it, and I hope I never do, but they are supposed to be very aggressive. I mean, it's like the stories that you see about sable antelope. You look at them, oh, they're magnificent and stately and all this, and they're supposed to be ferocious. Just as our roan that I saw in Cameroon. And so, but no, I've never had to deal with that. I hope I never do.
Mm-hmm. Now, it seems like of the, I'm using not precise, not very scientific terms here, but it seems of certain animals, like they have different ways of defending themselves. Some just run away if they're in trouble. Others will turn and fight. Others seem like they want to hide. And it seems like, I don't know, of those broad categories, it seems like a Bushbuck is more likely to fight, and Nyala is more likely to stand there and try and blend in and hide. Am I kind of on base here, or is that more or less correct?
Well, I think it depends on, once again, whether an animal feels cornered or not. I will say that Bushbuck, my experience with Bushbuck is that, at least with humans, and see, that's really the question, is if there's a predator in the mix, do they try to run away like a reedbuck does? Mm-hmm. Or in the case of a Bushbuck, I expect you are exactly right, that they would do their best to turn the table on the predator. Mm-hmm. But what I have seen with especially Bushbuck is that you'll hear the bark, you haven't seen the animal, and they're gone.
It's true. Yeah.
You can hear them going. And I've seen, I've had them bark at me, and I've just caught a flash when I was really trying to get a Bushbuck, and it was tough in Catata 11. We got it on. It's one of those hunting stories that's really true. We got it on the last day in the afternoon. Well, that's what we did. But we had heard them bark at us when we were trying to work slowly through and quietly through areas, and heard them crashing off. So I think with humans, all of these organisms, all these animals are in these areas pretty keyed up. You have to be careful with them. In Nyala, I got to tell you the story. It was absolutely hilarious. So it was one of those things where I was on my standing stable sticks. We had spotted the royal my PH and tracker had spotted a beautiful bull, and it was actually a set of 3. And of course, I've had it happen before where I was on the wrong animal. And so Adrian PH was like, he's there, he's here. And they were browsing through or grazing through at the edge of this forest. And I had my 7mm, and I was on the bull. I'd actually gotten it right, and I was on the bull. Adrian went, no, that's the wrong one. And I was like, okay. So, and he was trying to look over my shoulder, And I said, all right. And they're about 150, 160 yards off, and they're moving. So I had to adjust again. Got back on him, and he said, the one on the far left. And I turned around with my sense of humor, and I said, I was on that darn thing the first time. Now he's further off. So I really would appreciate it if you'd quit whispering in my ear right now. But I've made boo-boos, so I was actually glad they were watching me. But anyway, that's how I got mine, and it was a beautiful bull. He was gorgeous. They have gorgeous bulls, and I mean, they have 32-inch, 34-inch, 36-inch Nyalas there. They are freaking enormous there. Mine was not that large, and he was beautiful, and he's all I want. But they do get them there.
Yeah, for the listeners, something in the high 20s is a nice Nyala, and stuff over 30 is a really, really nice Nyala.
It's big. Yeah, and that's, like I told you, that's what my brother's going back. He wants to gloat. So that's
Well, tell us about the Bushbuck that you took.
So the Bushbuck that I got was we hunted and hunted and hunted and hunted for this Bushbuck. It was really my dream animal from there, but I wanted a big, and but I didn't have an opportunity to shoot a little one, so it didn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
We saw a few, but in the in across this safari that I was on with them, and we were actually there. This was the second visit. Yeah, this was the second visit for the book, and so we were there for months actually for the book, but this was the second visit, most taken up with interviews and things, but I was out hunting for bushbuck most days. So anyway, we got to the last day, and my PH said, all right, Dylan said, look, we have checked in every habitat that we expect them to be in. So we're going to do a Hail Mary, and we're going to go out into the floodplains where we really don't see them very often. We're going to go check there. And we got out there, and darned if they didn't spot a beautiful 17-inch, I mean, he was huge. And he was old as the hills. He had no teeth when we got him down on the ground. He had no teeth. His cape was shiny. There was no hair on it, on his face and his forehead and his neck. He was a beautiful old battler. In fact, I wanted that cape on him when they did the shoulder mount, and my taxidermist from South Africa called me and said, or WhatsApped me and said, I hate to tell you this, but we sent it to the tannery and it just fell to pieces. He was so old. But we found him as we rounded one of these copses of trees out on the floodplains. They rounded the corner and just froze, and then backed up, and we looked, and he was wandering in and across the plain and heading for a little island with trees. And he went into the water and swam across, very deep water, actually, probably 10 foot, 12 foot deep. Probably full of crocodiles, actually, too. Got to the island, and we got to an area, and I was able to take the shot right before he laid down, and we got him. The funny part of that story, though, to me, was that our tracker, I was talking to him, and I said, let me help you. Let me go across. And he was sort of stripping everything off to get across. And he said something in the language there that's called Finaglo, which is that combination language of, they throw everything in there. Sena villager, their language. Every dialect is in there, including just everything. It's a language that was made up for the gold mines, believe it or not, in South Africa, so all these different folks could communicate. But anyway, he says something to Dylan in that language. And Dylan grins, and I said, what did he say? And he said, the problem is that if you follow him over, he's going to have to carry both of you back, and he doesn't want to do that. And it was up to his neck, the water was, as he was trying to get across. So he was right. He would have carried me back. I would have drowned without his help. So,
but
we did get him, but the Bushbucks there are much, much rarer.
Yeah, man. Well, so you talked about how these two species compete in certain areas, especially in Kutata 11. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so once again, it's based on what I'm about to say is based on the observations of the PHs and outfitters and everything in Kutata 11, but it's also based on when I'd been told this about the competition between Nyala and Bushbuck by my two PHs there, and then additional PHs who I didn't hunt with, but who I interviewed about it after they had mentioned this. I then went to scientific papers actually about competition between Nyala and Bushbuck just to see if scientists had noticed this. But here's what I was told by my PHs and what I was shown. If you drive through the areas, and I bet you've seen this too as well, John, in different areas, the browse lines from different animals. Now, elephants just knock a tree over, right?
Mm-hmm.
And giraffes go up and take the tops out of trees. That's why they're so devastating, because that kills the tree, because it gets that growth area of the tree, and then the tree drops over. That's why people can't have too many giraffes around. But when you have these antelope, like Bushbuck and Nyala, they browse up to a certain level on the bottoms of those trees. And so they'll just take off. It looks like someone's taking shears and just sheared them off even, level as to the browse height of those animals. Well, Nyalas are, say, about 50% or more larger than Bushbucks, which means that they can get higher. Mm-hmm. Well, that's one thing. But the other part is there's so many more of them that they can literally push Bushbuck off of feeding areas, right? And because there's just numerically, there's more of them and they're larger. That's the same way, going back to my analogy with elk and mule deer, especially in winter browse areas or winter feeding areas. One of the things that scientists are noticing about elk and mule deer is that the elk come in greater numbers, because we love having our elk around. Don't get me wrong, and I love hunting them. But there's so many more of them. They're so much larger, they can push the mule deer right off of the feeding areas. So the first thing we notice is that you have these kinds of feeding competitions, but you also, with the Bushbuck and Nyala, have bedding competitions, as in, where are they going to sleep at night to keep away from predators? Where are they going to have their young? So there's only a limited certain amount of places where they can do this across the landscape, right? And so, what can they do? If there is no space, they're going to have to move on. They're going to have to go to another area, whatever it happens to be. And then finally, if there is conflict, if there are predators, what are the predators going to favor? Okay, who are they going to eat first? Mm-hmm. Okay, if that makes sense. And so all of those work in tandem, if you will, to determine who's going to be more numerous where. And what they've seen in South Africa with the scientific studies is, in certain areas where they've tracked them, certain areas, in fact, more than often, if you have Nyala and Bushbuck in competition, the Bushbuck go extinct. They eventually just disappear. And it's directly attributable to competition with Nyalas. In certain areas, they do okay if the Nyala population is kept in control through culling, basically hunting and culling, right? If they're restricted areas, you're going to have to control the numbers. So the Bushbuck can take certain numbers of Nyala and still be okay. In other areas, they're okay because there is a large leopard population, and it appears that leopards, which are the primary predators for both of them, probably prefer Nyala. Don't know why. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's because it's a larger animal. Maybe it's because they're less aggressive. It's what you and I talked about. Possibly. I don't know. But they do prefer them, and they keep the Nyala numbers in check if you have a very healthy leopard population. So there's a bunch of variables. In Kutata 11, what my PHs told me multiple pHs, our bushbuck are in trouble because we have too many Nyala.
So what are they doing about that? Are they trying to cull some Nyala then?
Well, that's in discussion right now because this is something. These data that I'm mentioning from South Africa are actually very recent. And so this was a guess, if you will. I think it's a good intuition, but a guess on the basis of pHs that the Nyala are outcompeting the bushbuck. The thing about it is here, the good thing about Catata 11 and that whole Maramayo complex you have to keep in mind is it's not fenced. Mm-hmm. So there could, I don't know that this will be the case, but there could be an equilibrium reached because the Nyala will spread across the landscape out of Catata 11 and the dense Nyala populations will actually become much less dense, okay, because they'll spread across the landscape because they're competing with one another as well. That is one outcome that could happen. My concern is that it won't happen soon enough, that they do need to cull. Mm-hmm. The problem there is, where will the meat go and what do you cull? Obviously, in biological situations like this, what you want to cull are females. Mm-hmm. If there's an overpopulation, I should say, of something, you want to hit the females because the males are not contributing to the population expansion like the females do in any kind of a animal system. That's what you want to do if you have an overpopulation, is somehow, and of course in this case it would be relatively easy because you can identify the female. Like we said, the females look real different.
yeah 100%. Yeah.
But I'm interested in talking to Mark Haldane and saying, are you guys considering this? Because he and I have had that conversation before.
Because there are so many more Nyala there just anyway, does it work out that right now their hunters are killing more Nyala bulls than they are bushbuck?
Definitely, there's more Nyala historically in that area because remember, Mozambique was the center of Nyala hunting, and there was a reason for that, and that is because it really that habitat fits them well. And so absolutely, people come in, and I mean, let's face it, Nyalas are gorgeous. Bushbuck are too to me, but I mean, Nyalas are just a beautiful animal, and so people who come to that concession and others that have really nice Nyala are wanting an Nyala. It's on the real top of their list, and bushbuck tend to not be. So yes, more Nyala bulls are definitely being taken than bushbuck.
So for the listener, there's really 4 quote unquote spiral horn species: kudu, eland, Nyala, and bushbuck. And there's a couple of different species within that people can take. But if you want the spiral horn slam, that's the 4 that you take. And it sounds like this part of Mozambique is a great place for Nyala. I know buffalo is the real big thing that they have in Catata 11. You mentioned reedbuck. There's diker there as well. Can you just kind of go through the whole list of game that people normally hunt there?
So, one of the real attractions there for the folks who have hunted in Africa quite a lot are the members of the tiny 10 is what they're called. And so they have 2 of them there that, they have 3 that people really go after. But one of them, probably the primary one that people go there for, is the Sunni. Because there are not a lot of areas where people have a lot of Sunni antelope. They're a little tiny thing. And once again, one of the tiny 10. And then folks also go there for blue diker, which is the smallest antelope that they have there. Bit smaller. I'm talking about in Catata 11, that is. Blue diker is the smallest. And then folks go for red diker, which are a little bit larger than the Sunni and much larger than the blue diker. Now, they also have Oribi there. I shot the Oribi that I have that completed my part of my tiny 10 I took there. They do have reedbuck, the common reedbuck there. They have the Salu zebra that they take some of. They have enormous water buck. I got a 31-inch water buck while I was there, and for once again, for these are just the normal old water buck, common water buck. And so they have those. And for listeners, once again, I don't go out for trying to get the top 10 animal. I want mature males, etc. But that's a really large water buck. It really is. And I was very fortunate. I was happy with that. They have the common sable, although I've been told that genetic tests have shown that it's actually the Roosevelt sable in that area. Now, if that's the case, I'm hoping that that's the case, that actually goes through SCI, that they agree, yes, it's Roosevelt sable, because I just shot the cheapest Roosevelt sable of any. Because the only way you can get a Roosevelt sable is to go to Tanzania right now, I think, is to go to Tanzania, basically, and pay for a 24-day safari, which I can't afford. So that's what I've said. Please make that a Roosevelt sable. But it's a beautiful sable. It's a gorgeous old sable. And so they have sable. They have eland, the common eland there as well. I'm trying to think what I've forgotten. Oh, they have hartebeest there as well. Liechtenstein.
Tons of warthog, you said, right?
Yeah, warthog they obviously have there. And then they have my favorite pig. I shot a bush pig. They're gorgeous bush pigs. And the interesting thing there is that unlike elsewhere, they have the bush pig I shot in broad daylight, and you see them in broad daylight. We got within 20 feet on one of my safaris, a founder of bush pigs when we were out stalking. So you get to do that. They also have leopard, obviously, and they have hyena. They have not hunted a lion yet from their reintroductions. But I believe they're close because they have a lot of males that are old males now, and they're not in, they don't have a harem, so they're outside of those prides, and so they will start hunting those. The cheetah are off license, so they won't hunt those. So.
Yeah, it's an interesting mix of animals you talk about there, but it seems to fit with the habitat. In a river delta, I would expect there to be tons and tons of water buck, just like you described. But so no kudu, no impala, no blue wildebeest.
They do have impala there. I should have said they do have impala on license there, and you do see some impala. To my eye, they're not really huge impala. Mm-hmm. But people, I'm sorry, I've seen them. I've just shot my impala, so I haven't thought about getting them. But yeah, those are on license. I didn't even mention buffalo. You had mentioned it already, but obviously they have 45,000 buffalo or whatever. So they have quite a few of those.
So in terms of like the popularity of animals that people hunt there, like where do Nyala rank in that hierarchy, would you say?
Really high. Really high. Once again, because of the quality, the size of them, and their beautiful coloration, they're just like they are anywhere else. So there's so many of them, so you can spend a wonderful amount of time looking through, knowing that you can get one, more than likely, and you can hold out, and it's hunting. My brother held out for a 30-inch or larger. Once again, I told him it was because he was trying to beat mine, which was like 28, 29 or something. But he held out and he didn't get one. So it is hunting, but you see them every day. And so the Nyala there really are taken by, I wouldn't say most people, but I would bet it is most people who go there. That's one of their key species they want.
And it seems like even in areas where it's quote unquote better bushbuck hunting, it's still just very hit or miss with them. That's a more advanced species. A lot of people kind of take them by chance, or they really put in some days on them.
That's what we did. I agree with you. And the analogy once again for me is trying to think about, for your listeners who are in North America, trying to get that big whitetail buck.
Yeah.
You're going to have to dig them out. And yes, you might get them on a stand, but they're not going to probably walk up to you across a wheat field. They might, depending on the area, but probably not. You're going to have to really be doing your spot and stalk and crawling through dense stuff. Mine, that's the reason they considered it a Hail Mary on mine. They didn't really expect to see it. They just said, look, we haven't found them elsewhere. Let's go out here. You like it. Basically what they said, and it was true. You really love this area and you need more photographs for your B-roll and video. Let's just go out there. And I said, okay. And we happened to run. I think this thing was just out there because he was a grumpy old white man. That's what I think happened. He didn't have any teeth. He was just angry. And so he was out away from everybody. That's what I told my PH and tracker. It's just like my dad. He's a grumpy old white man.
All the ladies are like, get away from us, you stinky old grumpy man.
But I really do. I agree with you. It is, I don't even know if you and I would consider them a species, like an opportunity hunt, but it's almost like that. Right. But you can hunt them. I mean, you can hunt them. We hunted them hard and we got close. And that's what make them lovely animals to hunt to me, is because it is a tough hunt. It's like my blue diker was. It very different kind of thing where you just saw a little blue blur, and, that was my first safari and never got one. Mm-hmm. We hunted hard. I saw one really nice male on the second safari, and I was fortunate and got him. But, those animals are really fun for hunting because, you walk away, quote unquote, with I don't consider them failed hunts. Without the animal, I consider them joyous times to be out there trying to match my wits with these animals. So,
yeah. And it seems like bushbuck in particular are an animal that often a guy may catch a glimpse of one on that first safari over there and think, man, I really want that. And then it's a more advanced species and they come back on a second or a third hunt and try and get one of them.
Well, and another bushbuck that I really want, and I don't have one, is one of those black ones, from South Africa, from the Cape area, Eastern Cape. And we hunted hard up in the Cat River area for a bushbuck, and we saw two, and they outsmarted us. We spotted both of them and didn't get to them before they disappeared. So I don't have a real great record with bushbuck. You wouldn't want me as a PH on bushbuck. Let's say that.
Now, I know SCI does some kind of weird divisions of animals sometimes for their record book. So in their record book, they list a Cape bushbuck, a Limpopo bushbuck, a Chobe bushbuck, a harnessed bushbuck, an East African bushbuck, and a Nile bushbuck. It seems like the Zambezi Delta is right on the border between the Limpopo and the Chobe bushbuck. Do you know what they called them in that area where you were?
They call them the Chobe.
The Chobe, okay.
They do. And you're right. These are, and people understand this, these are, human-made divisions. They try to use science when they can. And I like that. They're using more and more genetics to help folks out when they can do that. And in fact, that's what they're depending on now with most animals. If you want to prove that you have a certain animal in a certain area, then they're going to require DNA. And, is it the same thing as X, Y, or Z or different? So it is true. But yeah, they call them the Chobe.
Do you know how long Nyala and bushbuck will live in the wild?
I do not know that. Yeah, that's a good question. And I just gave you my professor answer when I gave it to all the kids. And I'll follow that up with the same professor answer, which is I can look it up. But I don't know. I actually don't know how long they live, how old that male that I had, which was on his last legs and no teeth. So, Is it 12 years? Is it 16 years? Is it 8 years? I don't know.
But it seems like, at least if you were guessing, you would think that they probably live longer than something like an impala then.
I would think that they would, but that's only because of habitat and because of protection from more predators that are out there, that the impala are going to get hammered by things that these others are not going to. But that's a guess. I will say it's a guess. I would have to look it up to be able to do that. I need to make a table someday.
Yeah. The question that I always get is, one, how much does it weigh? And, the answer is it depends, and it varies depending on the animal. And the biggest eland, it's probably bigger than the biggest buffalo, but you just pull a buffalo out of a herd, it's probably bigger than a random eland that you pull out of a herd too.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And the same thing with the age. I'm sure that also varies depending on, is it male or female? What country was it in? What specific area was it in? Is there a lot of predation? Is there a lot of hunting there?
Exactly. It really does vary. I mean, normally the ages that we get, to be perfectly honest with you, normally as biologists, and you probably know this, it's coming from captive populations, so it doesn't count. But that'll give us what that does. Obviously, it gives us the maximum age. If you feed them, it's like a cow. If you feed them, you don't eat them for hamburger, how long do they live?
Yeah, very interesting with that stuff. So we've talked a lot about these different animals, where they live, what they eat, how they're often hunted. And then that was so interesting. You were saying about how they compete with each other and the possibilities for what's going to happen with that. I mean, your analogy with the elk and the mule deer is so good. The more I think about it, because the more elk you have in an area, oftentimes the fewer mule deer that you have.
And I don't want your listeners to think that it's just a one-to-one interaction, and that's what's causing these populations to diminish. That's not it. However, there can be major factors, and competition, we know as biologists, competition is often the major factor, not the only one, but the major factor. And, there's a reason that scientists in South Africa went in and said, okay, we know the history in this area. We know we used to have bushbucks, and we know they introduced in Nyala. Where are the bushbucks? And then they put up the trail cams, and they see and they monitor them for a decade. And they watch the bushbucks slowly go extinct, and the Nyala populations swell. They look at what they're eating. They examine the stomach contents, and they notice, they're really overlapping in their food preferences, and they're overlapping where we see them on camera traps, and they're and so they build this picture up, and it built this picture up for the Nyala and the bushbuck and those are different bushbucks, obviously, down in South Africa, right? So we're talking about Cape or whatever the heck it is, not the Chobies, but they are seeing how the Nyala really, really are, in one sense, because that's not where they were, even if they've moved in naturally, but they're an invasive species. It's like the muntjac that I hunted recently in England. They're listed as an invasive species because they damage so much habitat, consuming so much habitat that then it affects everything from other deer species or whatever, fallow stags, whatever the heck it is, all the way up to birds. And so in the case, like you said, of the elk and mule deer, the mule deer are also struggling, obviously, with wasting disease, where the elk are not, but with CWD. But what they're seeing is that the elk are indeed outcompeting them, particularly in hard winters for food. That's a real pivot point, if you will, where the mule deer can get toppled off of one side.
And it seems like elk in general are a more resilient species than mule deer are. They're more sensitive to things changing in their environments with buildings and roads and that sort of thing, more so than an elk is.
They are, and if we, this has been pointed out by other writers and lots of biologists, keep in mind, they're back in Nebraska, right? Elk are out there on the plains in Nebraska and the flatlands. And people may look at that, and I could have easily, even being a biologist, you could look at that and go, wait a second, somebody's dropped them off there. That's not their habitat. We all know that they're supposed to be in the mountains. Mm-hmm. Well, in actual fact, as we moved across, as humans, Europeans moved across from east to west, keep in mind that we had elk east of the Mississippi. We had bison east of the Mississippi. We had elk all across the plains, huge herds of elk. That was their more normal habitat as grazers, was that kind of habitat. And we pushed them into relictuals, what we call it, relic populations up in the mountains to escape us and the market hunters in particular. And so that's why we associate elk hunting. I love it. I love hunting in the mountains for elk, but that's not really their habitat. And so they are broader in what we call adaptations to habitats. They are doing great up in the mountains. They do great in riverine habitats. They do wonderfully out on the plains. And the mule deer, like you said, the mule deer, keep in mind, are riverine and just upslope. So the white-tailed deer are in those river bottoms, and the mule deer are just up. That's why they mate with one another quite often in North America. They're up against one another, but the mule deer have a much more limited habitat preference than an elk does. Likewise, the bushbuck and in Nyala. That's really what's going on there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so you were also saying too that in Nyala, one of the reasons why they did so well for so long was they just happened to really like the areas that were really dangerous to people with malaria and whatnot.
The hunters that went after the in Nyala picked up malaria. I mean, that's the bottom line, because unless for some strange reason, the native hunters, with the sickle cell, I'm going to get all nerd all over you again, but with the sickle cell mutation, the native hunters, Black Africans who were there who had that mutation, would have been protected to some degree from the malarial infections. But white people who went in there, Europeans, whoever went in there, they were going to pick up malaria. And quite often they died from it. Yeah. So if you wanted to go into those swamps, or really their freshwater marshes, different kind of habitat. But if you went into that delta area in Mozambique, you were going to pick up malaria. If we didn't take the malarial prophylaxis while we're there, my wife and I, very likely we would come up with a case of malaria after a while.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm probably going to do a show on just that whole deal, all the tropical illnesses and whatnot that you can get hunting in Africa, because that's something we could talk about for hours. What a mess that can be if way back in the day before they had vaccinations and prophylaxis like that.
Yep. I mean, I don't know how these guys and gals who went in there survived half a day. I really don't. They were tough. They were tough people. So, and put up with an awful lot.
Well, Mike, this has been a very interesting conversation. I learned a lot about Nyala and bushbuck, and you're making me excited about going back over there and trying to hunt them again. Because in all my hunts over there, I've seen several nice ones of each one, but I've never shot a bushbuck or an Nyala, and I need to fix that.
Oh, you absolutely need to fix that. But don't you get one of those black cape ones? I'm going to be really frustrated if you get one before I do. No, I hope you do. I hope you get one. But yeah, I affirm you ought to go to Katata 11 if you want a massive Nyala.
So what does the future hold for you as we're talking here in August of 2024? What's up next for you with your next hunts?
Well, I just came back not that long ago from British Columbia, where I took a real nice, I call it a chocolate bear. There's a story coming out in Sports Field where titled it Chocolate in the Morning. Diana Rupp will probably change my title. She hates my titles. So, but anyway, so I did that. We were up there, and we were also working with the Takla youth, conservation through hunting and community outreach with the local First Nation kids. So we were doing that. I'm about to go tomorrow. Actually, I'm going for a stealth vision visit down in Texas. So I'm going back to the homeland where I grew up. And then in mid-September, I head to South Africa to a property that I've been to. It's the largest fenced property in South Africa. It's about 230,000 acres. And they have black and white rhino. They have lions. Actually, it's so large, U.S. Has designated the lions as a free-ranging population. I mean, there are no cross fences in it. But what I'm going to be doing there, I'm going to hunt. My wife has me on it. Francis will say, you got to go get this. And so I've got her shopping list. I'm going to hunt a Gemsbok while I'm there. They have enormous ones, beautiful ones, because it's in the Kalahari Desert. But we're also supposed to move 40 white rhinos. We're going to dart and move 40 white rhinos. So that's my next hunting. And then I go back to Texas in November to hunt with Larry Weiss. And November or December, he wants me to rattle up a whitetail buck. I told him if I start rattling, every whitetail buck in the whole county is going to head the other direction. But anyway. So those are what's coming up for me in the near future, anyway.
Well, very good, Ben. You got a busy schedule coming up. I'd be interested to hear how some of those trips go, especially your trip with the rhino.
I would love to come back on and show you photos and talk to you about them. It's going to be fun. I've done it once, but I didn't do 40. I'm getting old. I don't know why they think I should do 40 rhinos, but I have 40 chances to get squished. So.
Well, I'll put a link in the show notes to where people can go get your book, Bringing Back the Lions. Anything else that we should point the listeners to with your website or social media or anything like that?
MikeArnoldOutdoors.com. They can get there and see what we've been doing, the hunts we're doing, and the different kinds of trips and what all we're doing and where it's coming out.
All right. Well, sounds good. Mike, it was a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Oh, thank you, John.
Like I mentioned, links to Mike's website and to the Amazon listing for his book, Bringing Back the Lions, are in the show notes. Be sure to purchase a copy of that book. It is fantastic. It is rare to see a book like that from a guy like Mike, who is both a hunter and someone that can speak intelligently about the biological and scientific stuff going on behind the scenes regarding conservation. It's a great read. You're going to learn a lot. I highly recommend it. You can also listen to episode 213 when Mike was also on the show, and he talks about his book, Bringing Back the Lions, and the story behind it. He was also on the show, episode 253, to talk about a hunt he went on in 2023 in Cameroon. That's another great episode. Links to both of those episodes are in the show notes as well. Like I mentioned earlier, shoot me an email, john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com, if you would like to hunt with me on the podcast hunt next year, or if you're interested in going to Africa at a discount this October or November. Our hunters take a few nice bushbuck there and really take some nice Nyala there each year, along with other stuff like kudu, impala, buffalo, wildebeest, zebra, the normal species that you think about when you think about hunting Africa. Now, finally, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you sign up for my email list. To do that, click the other link in the show notes or go to huntingguns101.com. Sign up there for my free ebook on the best hunting calibers. You'll get my free ebook when you do so, plus you'll also receive the emails I send out every weekday. If you like the podcast, especially episodes like this one, you will love those emails. So make sure you are getting them too. Go to huntingguns101.com and sign up. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to thebiggamehuntingblog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.